Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NPA Discovery, the channel where we look beyond the polished photographs, the studio publicity, and the glamorous myths to discover the human stories hidden underneath Hollywood history. Today, we are exploring the extraordinary life of actress Jean Peters and her deeply unusual marriage to billionaire aviator and film producer Howard Hughes. It is a story filled with movie stars, secret ceremonies, private letters, professional rebellion, emotional distance, and one of the strangest domestic arrangements ever associated with the golden age of Hollywood. I agree with the idea that this was one of Hollywood's most bizarre marriages. By ordinary standards, almost nothing about it looked normal. Husband and wife often lived apart. Communication could pass through assistants. Privacy became secrecy, and secrecy gradually became isolation. Yet I strongly disagree with telling this story as though Jean Peters were simply a supporting character in the tragedy of Howard Hughes. She was not just the woman standing beside an eccentric billionaire. In many ways, she spent her entire life refusing to become the person other people wanted her to be. Hollywood wanted her to be a decorative beauty. She preferred tough women, pirates, outsiders, and survivors. Studios expected obedience. She repeatedly said no, even when refusal threatened her career. The public wanted her to expose her famous husband. She chose silence. Hughes apparently wanted closeness on his own terms, control through layers of distance, and a marriage shaped around his fears. Eventually, Peters chose a life beyond him. That does not make her decisions simple, perfect, or easy to understand. It makes them human. And that is why this story matters. It is not only about fame or wealth. It is about identity. It is about the difference between being admired and being known. It is about how a person can live inside a relationship that appears powerful from the outside while feeling strangely empty from within. Most of all, it is about the difficult moment when loyalty stops being love and begins to cost someone their freedom. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it with anyone who enjoys classic Hollywood stories, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating thoughtful, deeply researched videos about the people behind the legends. And as you listen, tell us in the comments, do you think Jean Peters protected Howard Hughes out of love, fear, loyalty, or some combination of all three? Now let us begin not with the billionaire, not with the secret wedding, and not with the rumors but with a young woman from Ohio who once believed that her future would be spent in a classroom. When people hear the name Howard Hughes, they often picture money, airplanes, Hollywood power, and eventually a life dominated by fear and seclusion. When they hear the name Jean Peters, many remember a beautiful actress from the 1940s and 1950s, or perhaps the secretive woman who became Hughes's wife. That imbalance is revealing. Hughes became a symbol. Peters became a mystery attached to that symbol. But mysteries are sometimes created because a person refuses to perform for the public. Jean Peters did not spend her later life explaining herself. She did not publish a sensational memoir about Hughes. She did not build a second career by selling private stories. She rarely supplied journalists with the details they desperately wanted. In an industry where attention can become a currency, she treated privacy as something that still belonged to her. That choice has made her harder to understand, but it also tells us something important about her character. From the beginning, Peters seemed uncomfortable with being reduced to an image. She entered Hollywood because a beauty contest opened a door, but she resisted the idea that beauty should define the entire room. She was praised as a screen siren, yet she often preferred characters who were muddy, angry, practical, wounded, or dangerous. She could wear glamour convincingly, but she did not appear to trust it. Jean Peters's career can be read as a long argument with that instruction. She was born Elizabeth Jean Peters in East Canton, Ohio, in 1926. Her background was not filled with private limousines or studio executives. She came from a farming community. Her mother managed the household, and her father worked in the laundry business. The future that appeared reasonable was practical and respectable. Peters planned to teach. She attended Ohio State University and studied toward a life that had nothing to do with movie premieres. Then Chance arrived wearing a sash and carrying a camera. While attending university, Peters entered a beauty contest. We can imagine the decision as something temporary, perhaps adventurous, perhaps even playful. Yet when she won, the prize did more than recognize her appearance. It included an opportunity for a screen test with 20th Century Fox. In one instant, Hollywood transformed from a distant dream into an actual destination. The contest sponsor, photographer Paul Robinson, became her manager and helped guide her toward the studio system. Fox signed her to a long-term contract. Peters left college, at least for the moment, and stepped into an industry famous for manufacturing identities. A contract could provide security, but it could also give a studio enormous power. The company did not simply hire an actor for one project. It invested in a marketable identity. Hair, clothing, interviews, romantic rumors, and even personality could become part of the product. For a young woman whose career began with a beauty contest, the obvious studio plan was to turn her into another glamorous discovery. Yet almost immediately, Peters began resisting the roles chosen for her. That resistance would frustrate executives, delay her progress, and eventually help define her legacy. Howard Hughes had dated some of Hollywood's most famous women. His name had been connected to actresses including Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Ginger Rogers, and others. He knew how to pursue glamorous women, and he possessed resources that could make almost any courtship extraordinary. But marriage required something different. It required daily presence, compromise, emotional availability, and the acceptance that another person had needs equal to one's own. Those ordinary demands became increasingly difficult for Hughes. By the time he married Jean Peters, his behavior had become more secretive and rigid. His fear of germs and contamination reportedly intensified. He relied heavily on aides. He created elaborate routines. He could exercise enormous control over companies and employees while appearing unable to tolerate ordinary human contact. The early living arrangement with Peters reflected this contradiction. The couple reportedly stayed at a Beverly Hills hotel but occupied separate bungalows. They were married, yet physical distance was built into the structure of the relationship. At first, Peters accepted the arrangement. Eventually, she insisted that they live more directly as husband and wife. Even after they shared a residence, Hughes maintained separate quarters and reportedly separate facilities. The house may have contained both people, but it did not necessarily create a shared home. This is where the story becomes psychologically powerful. A mansion can contain more loneliness than a small apartment. Wealth can eliminate practical discomfort while intensifying emotional emptiness. Two people can possess every luxury and still lack the simplest form of intimacy, unrestricted access to each other. Accounts suggest that Peters sometimes had to arrange meetings with her husband through his staff. Consider the emotional meaning of that. You are not trying to meet a distant executive. You are trying to see the person who promised to share a life with you. Yet the path runs through an assistant, a schedule, and a system of permission. Love becomes administrative. A contract could provide security, but it could also give a studio enormous power. The company did not simply hire an actor for one project. It invested in a marketable identity. Hair, clothing, interviews, romantic rumors, and even personality could become part of the product. For a young woman whose career began with a beauty contest, the obvious studio plan was to turn her into another glamorous discovery. Yet almost immediately, Peters began resisting the roles chosen for her. That resistance would frustrate executives, delay her progress, and eventually help define her legacy. Howard Hughes had dated some of Hollywood's most famous women. His name had been connected to actresses including Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Ginger Rogers, and others. He knew how to pursue glamorous women, and he possessed resources that could make almost any courtship extraordinary. But marriage required something different. It required daily presence, compromise, emotional availability, and the acceptance that another person had needs equal to one's own. Those ordinary demands became increasingly difficult for Hughes. By the time he married Jean Peters, his behavior had become more secretive and rigid. His fear of germs and contamination reportedly intensified. He relied heavily on aides. He created elaborate routines. He could exercise enormous control over companies and employees while appearing unable to tolerate ordinary human contact. The early living arrangement with Peters reflected this contradiction. The couple reportedly stayed at a Beverly Hills hotel but occupied separate bungalows. They were married, yet physical distance was built into the structure of the relationship. At first, Peters accepted the arrangement. Eventually, she insisted that they live more directly as husband and wife. Even after they shared a residence, Hughes maintained separate quarters and reportedly separate facilities. The house may have contained both people, but it did not necessarily create a shared home. This is where the story becomes psychologically powerful. A mansion can contain more loneliness than a small apartment. Wealth can eliminate practical discomfort while intensifying emotional emptiness. Two people can possess every luxury and still lack the simplest form of intimacy, unrestricted access to each other. Accounts suggest that Peters sometimes had to arrange meetings with her husband through his staff. Consider the emotional meaning of that. You are not trying to meet a distant executive. You are trying to see the person who promised to share a life with you. Yet the path runs through an assistant, a schedule, and a system of permission. Love becomes administrative. Their relationship did contain affection. Private communications reportedly included repeated expressions of love. Those letters and notes complicate any easy conclusion that the marriage was purely strategic or entirely empty. People can love each other and still create an unbearable relationship. Love is an emotion, partnership is a practice. One can exist when the other has collapsed. That distinction is essential. Many people remain in painful relationships because they continue to ask the wrong question: do we love each other? The answer may honestly be yes. A more useful question is, can this love produce a life in which both people remain whole? Peters and Hughes may have loved each other. But could their love create companionship? Could it create trust without surveillance? Could it create closeness without permission? Could it make room for Jean Peters as an independent human being? The longer the marriage continued, the more difficult those questions became. The surviving descriptions of communication between Peters and Hughes are among the strangest and most revealing parts of their marriage. They reportedly exchanged notes filled with intimate details, practical instructions, health concerns, and declarations of affection. Assistants could carry words between two people who were sometimes physically near but emotionally separated by ritual and fear. There is something almost tragic in that image, love reduced to paper traveling down a hallway. Written communication can be deeply meaningful. A letter allows people to say what speech makes difficult. It slows emotion down. It preserves tenderness. Lovers separated by war, immigration, work, or illness have used letters to maintain relationships across enormous distances. But Peters and Hughes were not always separated by geography. The distance was created inside the relationship. That difference changes the meaning of the letters. They were not only bridges over unavoidable space. They may also have been evidence of a system that made ordinary closeness impossible. The notes apparently contained frequent expressions of love, which suggests that affection remained real. It would be too simple to portray Peters as a prisoner who felt nothing or Hughes as a calculating villain who felt no attachment. Human relationships rarely fit that clean design. Hughes could be possessive and loving. Peters could be loyal and frustrated. Both could participate in a bond that neither knew how to repair. The real-life example many viewers may recognize is a relationship that survives mostly through messages. Two people send affectionate texts throughout the day but avoid difficult conversations in person. They exchange heart symbols, memories, and promises, yet never resolve the problem controlling their future. Communication creates the sensation of closeness without the vulnerability of actual presence. Words can express love, but they can also postpone change. A message saying, "I love you," may be sincere. It does not automatically answer, "Will you meet me halfway?" Peters's loyalty to Hughes became visible in another form, her refusal to discuss him publicly. Journalists understood that she might be the best route into the private world of the famous recluse. They wanted details. She offered almost none. Her silence has been interpreted in different ways. Perhaps she protected a man she still loved. Perhaps she feared legal or personal consequences. Perhaps she believed marriage created an obligation that survived disappointment. Perhaps she understood less about Hughes's daily life than the public assumed because even she was kept at a distance. All of those possibilities may contain part of the truth. Silence is not a single emotion. It can be loyalty, shame, self-protection, dignity, fear, exhaustion, or control. Sometimes it is the only area in which a person still feels powerful. When everyone demands a story, refusing to tell it can become an act of ownership. Peters's silence also prevented the public from fully defining her marriage. The absence of explanation allowed rumors to grow, but it kept the most intimate material from becoming entertainment during her lifetime. In a culture that rewards exposure, she did not convert pain into publicity. There is something admirable in that restraint. There is also something sad about it. Silence can preserve dignity, but it can leave a person alone with experiences that need witness. The challenge is knowing when privacy protects the self and when secrecy protects the problem. During these years, Peters did not simply disappear. She returned to education and studied sociology at UCLA. That choice is easy to overlook, but it may be one of the most meaningful decisions of her adult life. The woman who once left university for Hollywood returned to learning after fame had already proven itself temporary. She did not need a degree to impress the public. She had already worked with major stars and appeared in successful films. Education offered something different, a space where her value did not depend on a camera. Imagine the contrast. On a film set, lights, costumes, and framing tell the audience where to look. In a classroom, a former movie star sits among other students and must read, think, question, and contribute. The identity shifts from image to mind. This return suggests that Peters continued searching for a life larger than the roles assigned to her. Hollywood had called her a beauty. Hughes's world may have treated her as wife, protector, or necessary companion. Education allowed her to become a student again, someone defined by curiosity rather than status. One of the most striking details surrounding Jean Peters and Howard Hughes is the scarcity of public photographs showing them together as a married couple. Hughes had been photographed with other women. Peters had been photographed with co-stars and at public events. Yet their marriage seemed to exist largely outside the public frame. For celebrities, privacy can be healthy. Not every relationship needs to become a performance. But in this case, the lack of public evidence matched a deeper absence. They did not merely avoid photographers, they often appeared to avoid ordinary shared life. A marriage usually creates memories that become visible in small ways: trips, celebrations, friends, meals, arguments, photographs, routines, places both people remember. Even private couples leave traces in the stories of those around them. Peters and Hughes instead seem surrounded by separation. This makes their bond feel almost symbolic. Hughes had spent his life mastering physical distance. He built aircraft, broke aviation records, and moved through enormous business empires. Yet emotional distance proved harder to cross. The man who could design machines to conquer the sky could not easily walk across a room into ordinary intimacy. Peters, meanwhile, had built a career around women who survived difficult environments. On screen, she played outsiders who crossed oceans, swamps, borders, and dangerous streets. In marriage, the obstacle was not physical danger. It was the slow erosion caused by absence. Dramatic crises are sometimes easier to recognize than gradual ones. If a relationship contains one explosive betrayal, friends understand why it ends. But what happens when the problem is 1,000 small disappearances? A missed conversation. A door kept closed. A meeting postponed. A decision controlled by staff. A day when affection is written but not lived. No single moment looks large enough to justify leaving. Together, they become a life. That may help explain why the marriage lasted until 1971. From the outside, 14 years seems astonishing. But people do not experience 14 years all at once. They experience one morning, then another. They remember better periods. They hope a condition will improve. They make adjustments. Wealth reduces some pressures and conceals others. Privacy prevents friends and strangers from understanding the full situation. There may also have been a strong sense of responsibility. Peters knew Hughes was unwell. Leaving someone who is suffering can feel cruel, even when staying is destructive. Caregivers often face this moral conflict. They ask whether protecting themselves means abandoning someone vulnerable. The answer is not simple. Loyalty is honorable, but loyalty without boundaries can consume the loyal person. Caring for another human being does not require surrendering the right to exist. By the late 1960s, Hughes had become even more isolated. His life moved through hotel rooms, trusted aides, darkened spaces, complex instructions, and increasingly severe physical and psychological problems. Peters could not rescue him by sacrificing herself. No amount of love could substitute for treatment, accountability, and his own willingness or ability to change. That recognition is one of the most painful forms of maturity. We want to believe love can save people. Sometimes love helps. It provides patience, encouragement, and a reason to seek help. But love is not medical care. It is not a cure for addiction, obsession, trauma, or serious mental illness. A partner can support recovery, a partner cannot perform recovery on someone else's behalf. When Peters finally left the marriage, she was not necessarily proving that she had stopped caring. She may have been accepting that care was no longer enough. In 1971, Jean Peters and Howard Hughes ended their marriage. For the public, divorce involving a billionaire invites a predictable story: lawyers, property, accusations, and a settlement large enough to dominate headlines. Hughes possessed immense wealth. Peters could have fought for a far greater share of it. Instead, she accepted a comparatively restrained financial arrangement, reportedly an annual payment of $70,000 for life, adjusted in some accounts through later calculations of value. The exact financial context can be debated, but the central point remains: she did not attempt to build her future by taking the largest possible portion of Hughes's fortune. Why? Perhaps a larger battle would have required exposing private details she wanted to protect. Perhaps she valued speed and freedom more than money. Perhaps she still cared for Hughes and did not want to humiliate him. Perhaps the settlement already gave her enough independence for the life she wanted. Most likely, several motives overlapped. Money is often described as power, but there are moments when refusing money can also be power. It can say, "I will not remain tied to this conflict." It can say, "My life is worth more than years of litigation." It can say, "You do not own the next chapter simply because you can finance it." That does not mean people should accept unfair settlements. Many partners, especially those who sacrificed careers or provided unpaid care, deserve legal and financial protection. Walking away with too little can create lifelong hardship. Peters's situation was unique, and her choice should not become a rule for others. But within her story, the modest approach fits a long pattern. She repeatedly rejected the largest visible reward when it threatened to define her. She turned down roles. She refused Hughes's first proposal. She stepped away from film fame. She declined to sell private stories. During the divorce, she again appeared to choose control over maximum profit. The same year, she married Stan Hoff, a former 20th Century Fox executive who later worked as a producer. The speed of the new beginning may surprise viewers, but emotionally the marriage to Hughes may have ended long before the legal documents were completed. Divorce papers often record the final date of a separation that has existed in spirit for years. With Hoff, Peters entered a more visible and apparently more conventional partnership. She also began considering a return to acting. Fans hoped for a major comeback to film, but Peters chose television. Her return included Winesburg, Ohio, adapted from Sherwood Anderson's stories. The project offered the kind of unglamorous material she had long preferred. Yet Peters reportedly found the final result disappointing and judged her own work harshly. That reaction shows the difficulty of returning after a long absence. Memory protects the best moments of an earlier career. The reality of a new production may feel slower, less magical, or less satisfying. Skills remain, but rhythm changes. The industry changes too. Television had grown in importance, audiences had shifted, and the Hollywood Peters left in the 1950s was not the same world she re-entered. Still, she continued. She appeared in The Money Changers alongside a celebrated cast that included Kirk Douglas, Christopher Plummer, and Joan Collins. She took additional television roles, including work connected with her husband's productions, and appeared in Murder, She Wrote. These later performances did not recreate the scale of her early stardom, but perhaps that was not the goal. She had already learned the cost of allowing a career to become an identity. Acting could now be something she did rather than something that consumed the whole definition of who she was. Peters's later career feels like that kind of reclamation. Howard Hughes's life has often been told as a dramatic fall, the brilliant young producer and aviator gradually becoming an isolated recluse. That narrative contains truth, but it can become too cinematic. Real decline is not a single transformation. It is a series of losses. A person avoids one room, then many rooms. Trust narrows. Routines harden. Medication changes judgment. Physical pain shapes behavior. Employees adapt to demands because they depend on the salary or fear the authority. The system surrounding the person begins to preserve the illness rather than challenge it. Hughes's wealth made this process unusual because he could build an entire environment around his fears. Most people eventually encounter limits. A landlord, employer, doctor, relative, or financial reality forces contact with the world. Hughes could pay others to rearrange the world around him. That ability may have reduced immediate distress while worsening long-term isolation. When a fear is always accommodated, the person never learns that the feared situation may be survivable. When every demand is obeyed, the demand grows. When employees are rewarded for compliance, no one wants to become the voice that says no. Peters had already spent her career saying no to powerful institutions. But saying no to a studio is different from saying no to a suffering spouse. A studio suspension is painful but clear. Emotional boundaries inside marriage are much harder. Every refusal can feel like cruelty. Every demand may arrive wrapped in vulnerability. This is why people who live beside severe dysfunction often lose confidence in their own judgment. They begin measuring reality according to the other person's reactions. A simple request becomes dangerous because it might trigger panic or anger. The healthy partner adapts, then adapts again, until the extraordinary begins to feel normal. Peters's experience appears to contain elements of that gradual accommodation. Separate living spaces, mediated meetings, controlled routines, and constant secrecy did not emerge as one dramatic agreement. They became the structure of life. The most inspiring part of her story is not that she tolerated it for years. Endurance by itself is not always a virtue. Sometimes endurance protects hope, sometimes it delays necessary change. The inspiring part is that she eventually recognized a boundary and crossed it. She could not cure Hughes by remaining married to him. She could not make him available by proving endless loyalty. She could not create trust inside a system built on control. Leaving did not solve his suffering, but staying had not solved it either. That truth applies beyond marriage. Parents cannot force an adult child to recover from addiction. Friends cannot love someone out of every destructive pattern. Employees cannot rescue a company whose leadership refuses reality. Compassion has limits because one human being does not possess authority over another person's choices. We can offer a hand. We cannot make someone take it. Peters's departure was an acceptance of that limit. Jean Peters entered Hollywood because strangers saw her face and imagined a future for her. Studio executives saw a potential star. Directors saw a siren. Audiences saw beauty. Howard Hughes saw a woman he could not forget. Journalists saw the possible key to a billionaire's secrets. Again and again, other people looked at Jean Peters and decided what she represented. But a human life is not a role assigned by an audience. This is the deepest reason her story continues to matter. Most of us will never marry a billionaire, star opposite Marlon Brando, or be offered a Hollywood contract. Yet almost everyone knows what it feels like to be placed inside someone else's expectation. A family decides you are the responsible one, so you are never allowed to need help. A workplace decides you are loyal, so it demands more than it gives. A partner decides love means constant access to your time. An audience decides what kind of creator you should remain. A past success becomes an instruction that controls the future. At first, the role may feel flattering. Being needed feels like being loved. Being admired feels like being understood. Being chosen feels like being safe. Then the cost appears. You stop asking what you want because the answer might disappoint people. You accept smaller spaces. You explain away behavior that once would have alarmed you. You tell yourself that endurance proves commitment. You keep waiting for the relationship, career, or family system to return to the version that existed in your memory. Jean Peters's life offers a warning: you can be surrounded by wealth and still be deprived of freedom. You can receive love letters and still feel alone. You can be married and still need an appointment to experience closeness. You can be famous and still struggle to be recognized as yourself. But her life also offers hope. She said no to Hollywood when roles violated her sense of self. She once said no to Hughes when marriage threatened her ambition. Later, she made a different choice and entered the marriage. When that choice became unbearable, she chose again. She returned to education. She returned to acting on her own terms. She built another life. The power was not in never making a painful decision. The power was in refusing to believe that one decision had to become a permanent sentence. Listen carefully, because this may be the part of her story someone needs today. You are allowed to revise your life. You are allowed to admit that what once looked like love now feels like control. You are allowed to leave a role that earns applause but destroys your spirit. You are allowed to begin again after the world has already decided your best years are behind you. You are allowed to protect your privacy, but you are also allowed to seek help. You are allowed to care about someone without surrendering yourself to their illness, anger, fear, or chaos. And you are allowed to choose peace even when peace looks less impressive than the palace you are leaving. Howard Hughes had airplanes, studios, hotels, corporations, and unimaginable wealth. Yet toward the end of his life, his world became smaller and darker. Jean Peters, who had far less power on paper, ultimately did something he could not: she moved outward. She reopened her life. That contrast is the emotional heart of this story. Real power is not the ability to control every room. It is the ability to walk out of the room that is destroying you. Real wealth is not possessing everything. It is having enough inner freedom to know what you no longer need. Real love is not a chain of declarations. It is the daily practice of allowing another person to remain fully alive beside you. Jean Peters will always be connected to Howard Hughes in Hollywood history. But she should not be remembered only as the woman who married him. She was the actress who resisted easy glamour, the student who returned to education, the private person who refused to sell every secret, and the woman who eventually stepped beyond one of the most powerful men in America. Her life asks us a final question: when the world gives you a role, will you perform it forever, or will you find the courage to write your own ending? Jean Peters wrote hers quietly. Not with a public attack. Not with a dramatic campaign. Not with the fortune she might have demanded. She wrote it by leaving, learning, working again, loving again, and refusing to let one strange marriage become the complete meaning of her life. That is not weakness. That is not disappearance. That is transformation. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can offer her is to recognize the same possibility in ourselves. Your past may explain you, but it does not own you. Your loyalty may honor you, but it should not erase you. Your mistakes may teach you, but they do not have to imprison you. No matter how long you have lived inside someone else's story, the next sentence can still belong to you. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear its message, and subscribe to Behind the Silver Screen for more thoughtful stories from classic Hollywood. In the comments, tell us what you believe Jean Peters's greatest act of courage was: refusing the roles she disliked, protecting her private life, leaving Howard Hughes, or starting again afterward. Thank you for watching. Remember, the brightest spotlight can reveal an image, but only courage reveals a life.